The topic of zombies in media today is arguably more divided than ever. Movies, TV, and especially video games. They are everywhere. Some people like myself love them and are always entertained by these undead and or infected abominations. But some people think over the last few years we may have gotten too much of a good thing and are now experiencing a severe oversaturation. I personally feel that we have enough variety and fresh ideas to keep this sort of subgenre going. But one big question is there room for more? Cue Dead Island 2. After 8 years of radio silence, we have confirmation that it is alive and well. It has made its way through development hell and is releasing this coming February. Now, with the idea of oversaturation in mind, the question I aim to answer for all of us today is, do we still need a Dead Island 2? My name is Brett Murphy, and welcome to Critics Play Games. Alright, hold up. Let's rewind for a few minutes first, shall we? This will work best if I paint you all a full picture, a puzzle with no missing pieces. You have to know Dead Island inside and out. You have to know what it was like when it first released, what it was like when we got the first trailer for its true sequel, and how far zombie games have come in the meantime. So, first things first, what is Dead Island? Well, the original Dead Island was developed by Techland and published by Deep Silver. It was first revealed at E3 in 2006, but just like its successor, things remained mostly silent until February of 2011, where we got the now famous trailer depicting a family at an exotic dream resort fighting off a horde of hungry, flesh-eating zombies. It was dark, somber, dramatic, and most of all, the real kicker, it was played in reverse order, and that is what made it so damn memorable. Fast forward all the way to September 6th of 2011 and we have our full release. How was this game received though? Why do you hear Dead Island and know the name and know almost exactly what I'm talking about? I mean, it made some pretty big promises. A massive open world set on a lush, vibrant, fictional tropical resort destination known as Banoi. 4-player co-op with friends or go at it alone. First-person perspective, a heavy emphasis on melee combat, but also offers a variety of firearms, and one of the most promoted features, its weapon crafting system. A cast of unique characters including a famous rapper, a former football star, a spy masquerading as a hotel receptionist, and an ex-police officer. They all mostly play and handle the same, but each of them has their own special abilities. The game is a horror action RPG, which means yes, there is leveling and a skill tree to progress through. A few different zombie types to spice things up, and plenty of gory, chaotic, zombie-slaying mayhem. Essentially the biggest, baddest, and boldest open-world survival game ever. Think something on the level of Fallout or the Elder Scrolls, but with zombies. So did it live up to the hype? The general consensus at the time was yes and no. It was goofy, buggy, filled with glitches, terrible cutscenes that included characters with stiff character models, dead eyes, and less than stellar voice acting, not to mention a pretty generic story. However, it was fun. People loved exploring Banoi, found most of the bugs and glitches hilarious and part of its charm. The weapon crafting was enjoyable, and of course, endless hordes of zombies to slay in bloody and brutal fashion. Just to back up my point a little, here are some of the big guns in the industry to help prove my point. The original has a 71 on Metacritic, IGN gave it an 8, Destructoid gave it a 7, GamesRadar gave it a 3.5 out of 5 stars, and GameSpot gave it a 7. Now, you may recall in the introduction that I defended zombies in media, in video games in particular, but even in general, I love zombies. If you follow my main channel, BamTube TV, shameless plug, sorry not sorry, then you would know that I love everything zombies. TV shows like The Walking Dead or Kingdom, movies like any of the Dead or Living Dead movies, World War Z, Zombieland, Shaun of the Dead, etc., and above all else, video games. games. And I must admit that I have a major soft spot for this original Dead Island. I remember going to a hockey game for the local team, and during the intermission, my best friend and I ran about 15 minutes up to the video rental store that was in that area, and after days, if not weeks of constantly checking, they finally had a copy available. I rented it on the spot for a week, got home that night, popped it into my good old Xbox 360, and at the age of 13 back in 2011, I fell in love with Dead Island. To this very day, I still play this game probably once a year. I agree with most, if not all, of the general critiques that this game has received, but the main reason that I love this game, aside from the obvious zombie killing goodness, is the island of Banoi itself. Be it the resort, the sewers, the jungle, or the city, I simply love this setting. It's its own character within this game, and by far the most interesting one. It's been over a decade since we got this original game, and yes, we did get the definitive edition, which was just a remaster visually, and not a very good one at that. And yes, it is clunky and awkward and generic, but for me, it has lost none of its charm. Speaking of that definitive edition that I just mentioned, let's very briefly touch on everything that has followed this original game in this Dead Island universe. First up was Dead Island Riptide, and Dead Island Riptide was first announced in June of 2012, and we got our first teaser in September of that year, which tried to recapture the magic and iconography of the first teaser for the first game, with a dramatic and depressing CGI trailer that in no way, shape, or form represents the actual game itself, this time involving a couple in a wrecked boat surrounded by zombies. This game was marketed and sold as a sequel, but it was really just glorified DLC that added boats and pretty much nothing else. Reviews ranged from mercifully mediocre to just bluntly honest and bad. They followed this up with a cartoonish game known as Escape Dead Island that got mostly awful reviews all the way around. In May of 2016, we got the definitive edition, which included both Dead Island and Riptide in all of their DLC, which was essentially just a half-assed remaster. Sure, the graphics were a bit prettier, but they made no other quality of life improvements, so you were basically just paying for the same game. Alright, so that finally brings us up to Dead Island 2. Leading up to that first trailer, fans of the original, myself included, had been dying, for better lack of a term, for a sequel. Instead, we got a glorified DLC and a weak, half-hearted spin-off that shared virtually no resemblance to the original at all. Then came E3 2014. We see a jogger, artificially augmented to fit his rich-looking lifestyle, jogging along the sunny boardwalk of LA. His music blasting through his headphones, zombie insanity unfolding behind him unbeknownst to himself, until finally he also transforms into one of them. We then get Jack Black, or at least a Jack Black sounding dude, carve his way across the boardwalk in a van, and then boom, Dead Island 2 splatters across our screen in glorious fashion. Gone was the whole gimmick of selling us a story that was not the story of the game. Gone was the overdramatic nonsense. No, this one was different. This one was going all in on exactly what the fans wanted. Pure, unfiltered, zombie slaughtering, open world fun. Originally, it was going to be developed by Techland once again, but they moved on to working on Dying Light. More on that later. Instead, it was developed by Yager, and it was set to be released in late 2015. But instead, in 2015, Deep Silver and Yager parted ways. In 2016, Sumo Digital took over development of the game, but that didn't last too long either, because at some point between then and August of 2019, production changed hands over to Dambuster Studios. Throughout all of this though, the publisher continually stated that the game was still in active development. A short few days before Gamescom 2022, it was leaked that Dead Island 2 was indeed alive and well, would be shown at Gamescom, and released only a few months later. Sure enough, the leaks were accurate and we got 2 new trailers showing off this new version of the game. When Dambuster Studios took over, they reportedly kept the setting but wiped everything else, and worked from a clean slate from the ground up. Now, herein lies the issue. back in 2011, Dead Island was something completely fresh and new. The only other major options at the time were things like Call of Duty Zombies and Left 4 Dead 2. What do they all have in common? First-person perspective, co-op, endless hordes of zombies. There were some other options out there too, like the always entertaining Dead Rising, as well as the still trustworthy at the time Resident Evil franchise. But since the release of the original, zombie games have come a long way. From far more unique offerings on the zombie subgenre to more story-driven titles, co-op with some twists, and some even going as far as being Game of the Year winners. With a long list including the likes of Project Zomboid, Back 4 Blood, World War Z, State of Decay 1 and 2 with 3 on the way, the Resident Evil remakes alongside 7 and 8, Telltale's The Walking Dead Seasons 1 to 4, and of course, The Last of Us Parts 1 and 2. But by far the biggest competitor to this universe, to the Dead Island brand, came from its own creator, with Techland's Dying Light and its sequel, Dying Light 2. What is Dying Light 2, you might ask? Probably not, but you might. Well, it's the bigger and better version of Dead Island. A bigger open world, faster paced combat thanks to the new parkour system, a day and night cycle that offers up more variety in enemies and completely changes the style of gameplay, more crafting, much better graphics, and so much more. Yes, it still has some of the clunkiness, the story and villain especially are still pretty generic, and a few other odds and ends that we get in most open world RPG games, but all in all, it's what the original Dead Island could have been. There was also a massive expansion that was well received titled Dying Light: The Following, and the 2022 sequel to the 2015 original improved on this formula even more. Better parkour, bigger world, compelling characters, a decent story, more new mechanics like assigning regions of the map to one of the two factions, which offers up more variety to the RPG elements, and even a few new enemy types, and so on. And so, that brings us to our final question. Well, our first and final. Do we still need a second Dead Island game? To tie everything back together, we needed to understand the history of Dead Island, why it was so popular, what came after and why it failed essentially, and why die-hard fans still held out hope for a true sequel. But arguably most importantly, we needed to understand the competition. Because with the plethora of zombie games currently available on the market, have we evolved beyond Dead Island and the need for a sequel that just seems like more of the same? Does this sequel offer up anything new or enough new stuff? It's still set in sunny LA, which isn't an island by the way, still has the first-person perspective, 3-player co-op instead of 4 this time around, 6 playable characters, and an open world filled with zombies. The main new features they really homed in on were a brand new gore system, a far more interactive environment, and a more robust crafting system. Which are nice little additions, don't get me wrong, but in the grand scheme of things, is it enough? Does the name and brand Dead Island hold any weight anymore after all these years? Can it compete with the competition that has evolved so much over the years in its absence? In particular, Dying Light, which again is just seen as the better version of Dead Island anyway, which once again came from the original creators. The final answer is really that there is no right answer. It's going to come down to the individual gamer. I doubt there are many die-hard fans of the franchise anymore. Most of us gave up hope of ever seeing this game long ago. We have Dying Light, its massive expansion The Following, and its sequel to fill in that need and desire. For me even, Dead Island kind of feels like a step back, but on the other hand, sometimes returning to basics, to the simpler and more bare-bones times can be a breath of fresh air. Only time will tell if people feel like they need Dead Island 2. I know despite my doubts, despite my criticisms, I will be jumping into Dambuster's self-proclaimed Hell A on day one. And I am very much so hoping to have all of my doubts completely proven wrong. But that's just my opinion. Most importantly though, we want to know what your thoughts are. Do you think we still need a Dead Island 2? Do you think it's too big of a step back, too little too late? Do you think it's made enough improvements and changes to draw you back in? Have you been clamoring for a true sequel since the original? Let us know down in the comments below. If you managed to stick with me through all of that, I just wanted to say a quick thank you so very much for watching. I have been Brett Murphy, and this has been Critics Play Games.